Thanks for having me. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. What a job, huh? You've got to show up, work hard every day in an often thankless job. You have to shepherd a diverse group of stakeholders, often with conflicting interests, get them all aligned on a path that they can live with, attempting to aim at a moving target. You have to do this with limited resources, right? Incomplete information. The only constant is change, and most experts agree that variability will be increasing. The work that many of you do is incredibly difficult. I just wanted to acknowledge that and acknowledge that it is also critically important for the future of our state. As Gary said, the water is the soul of the Hill Country. I think it's the lifeblood of the entire state, and the work you guys do is incredibly difficult, particularly when we add in elements like Robert was talking about sustainability. Well, for how long? The marriage rule, 8 years, 800 years? I like to contextualize that in terms of generations. Do I want my daughter to be able to live in Comal County and have access to reliable, clean water? Probably so. How about her children? How about the generation beyond that? It just helps me thinking about things with a humanistic bent, right? We look at a lot of data, we see a lot of graphs, but ultimately, the water user groups we interface with are the actual people. They are ranchers, they are irrigators, they are business people, and you guys are really boots on the ground, kind of front line to that, so I appreciate it. Luckily, I'm here to help today, hopefully a little bit. If we had a woodworking project, and I offered you a screwdriver or a multi-tool that had 9 built-in tools, which one would you opt for? I'd go for the multi-tool, right? The socioeconomic approach to considering DFCs is just another tool in your toolbox. I think the more tools that you have at your disposal in your toolbox, the more versatile you can be as practitioners, and the more versatile you are, the better the products that you will put out. So hopefully today we're going to kind of orient you towards what this lens can look like, how it can be used, and some of the things you're going to want to consider. As it was mentioned, I'm with Texas Water Trade. We aim to build a future of clean flowing water for all Texans. We enable and facilitate market-based transactions for people and the environment. We'll start with the definition. I picked up Oxford's dictionary, and they really failed me. I think my 8-year-old probably could have done better than this. Generally, you don't want to use the words you're trying to define in your definition, relating or concerned with the interaction of social and economic factors. Not very insightful. So let's try to take it up a notch. The study of socioeconomic components incorporates various facets related to prevailing social and cultural conditions and economic status of the study region. I think this is a much better working definition of what we're trying to get at today, but I'm a big fan of picture books. So let's look at it this way. I think this actually does a really good job of kind of describing the socioeconomic lens. You notice that the environment is in that Venn diagram. I subscribe to the belief that healthy environments make healthy people, healthy environments make happy people. You can omit that in your analysis if you choose, but I think we can roll that up into kind of that social bubble. If there's nothing else you take away today from today's talk, there's a very important concept here in this image, and it's the fact that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. It is very difficult to optimize these 3 bubbles at the same time. It's not impossible, right? We can think progressively. If we have rate makers or fee-based pumping activities associated with the DFC, if we can peel off some of that revenue, use that to fund a source water protection fund that can then enable irrigation efficiencies with the provision that if you want to be a part of this program, the water savings that are made stay in the aquifer, right? Then this thing can be self-sustaining. We get good environmental outcomes, good social outcomes, and we see no downticks in the business activity because yields don't decrease. Those transactions are when we high five. They are few and far between. We are working on an aquifer resilience fund to enable these types of transactions. Stop by the booth if you want to chat about it or it's something you're interested in. But by and large, our transactions are on a give and take basis. It's kind of the rule of marriage or the rule of life. It's all about balance and compromise, right? If you don't like there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, I also call this the Mick Jagger corollary, where you may not always get what you want, right? But you might get what you need. That really represents an opportunity, though, an opportunity to use this as a strategy that is highly adaptable and customizable to your particular geography and your cultural, social, economic makeup. That's the social piece. There's more in the recipe than money, right? Socioeconomics. Think about economics as very descriptive. It tells us what we can do. The socio piece of this may be a little more prescriptive and asks us to think, what should we do? Water for widgets. Say a big industrial user comes and they apply for a permit and they need to be a large extractor to facilitate business operations. It will generate jobs and will generate tax receipts for the community. It may also impact other groundwater extractors, and due to surface groundwater interaction may impact stream flows or river flows, right? If you are a fisher person and you have caught a red on a fly that may have been hatched where there are inflows to our bays and estuaries, or a rising trout that was hidden behind a riffle, or if you just like to sit by the stream in quiet contemplation of DFCs, we would all agree that those things have value. But it's hard to quantify the value of those things in dollars and cents. The socio piece of the socioeconomics allows us to consider those elements in our thinking when we're considering what's important to us. Is Wimberley still Wimberley without Jacob's Well? Maybe, maybe not. Whatever is important to you in your community can be included in this piece. So it's important that we understand where the insertion of the socio piece can go. And it's an opportunity for holistic thinking. Again, it's about making linkages, building bridges, finding ways that multiple user groups can be served in the best possible way. There's a theme that's developing here. You will not find a cookie-cutter solution. There is not an off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all pair of glasses we can put on and say, I've got it. The socioeconomic lens is in full effect. It is going to be highly dependent on the activity that is in your neck of the woods. The benefit of that is that you can protect what is most important to you. If you are a highly agrarian community and that represents the fabric of your local society, you can protect it. You can choose between you and your constituents, your stakeholders, what is important to you, what is important to your cultural identity, and how we're going to protect it. And it can be as detailed and or as costly as you choose, which we will see. We're not going to get super deep into the methods of how this can be done. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about approaches, how you might want to think about doing this, and then leave you with things to think about for how you can kind of do this on your own. The first choice is always you can pay for play. You can hire a consulting firm, third party. In all likelihood, they will use InPlan, which is economic input-output analysis. InPlan does a lot of things really well. Think about if you throw a stone in a pond and you see the circles, right? The ripples. If you take ag land out of production, it isn't just the crop value that you're taking offline. The lady that owns the tractor store is going to do a little bit less business. The feed store is going to do a little bit less business. There are ripple effects to our decisions, and the neat thing that InPlan does is that it can track those for you. This is pretty costly. I mean, this is going to be on the order of at least tens of thousands of dollars, and I know that GCD budgets aren't always the most robust to basically allow for this. You can rely on the work that the board does. Now, the board does exceptionally good work, and it looks to me like it is InPlan based. But this is really designed for regional water planning purposes, and it's all predicated on a drought of record. Now, I don't want to be a doomsday type of person. Generally, I'm an optimist, cautiously optimistic. But what if it's worse than the drought of record? First of all, people say it can't happen, potentially, but it seems to me that we are having many events, 100-year events, kind of stacked up in more recent history. I think we may be in the midst of shifting baselines, and sadly, those baselines are not moving favorably for us. It's also important to remember that these analyses are designed to calculate the cost of unmet demand in a drought of record, not the cost of your DFC, right? So you could hire a consulting firm to execute an in-plan analysis based on your DFC. That would be one way to do it. If it's spring flow based, it's pretty straightforward. It's in the management plan. Depth to water, you might need to think about another indicator or what you want to look at. Justin Thompson is at this conference. I would encourage you maybe reach out and talk to him. He's doing some really exciting work about what happens when wells fail, what is the direct cost associated with deepening those wells, or what will happen as a result of that. That's a real good place you can draw a straight line between the impacts and the costs. But when we think about an aggregate number, we think about an aggregate depth to water number, maybe for an indicator we could think about percentage of wells that have failed or that are near failure, right? You could do an in-plan analysis on your own. Just so you know, you have to pay for that too, sadly. They'll give you the software free, but if you want the actual data you need to run it, they charge you for that. So it's like if I give you a coaster holder, but if you want to have the actual coasters, you have to pay me for those separately. You also probably need a couple-day rudimentary training. The 2 or 3 day session when I was in Raleigh, I think was about $1,500 plus travel, plus time out of the office, plus staff time to actually run the analysis. So even doing a DIY in-plan analysis does come with some costs. Being the optimist I am, I don't like to end on the cons. I always like to end on the pros. So the cons and pros associated with the in-plan analysis: number one, it's expensive. It does take time unless you outsource it entirely. Also, the assumptions that go into it, it does operate in a semi-black box fashion in that you kind of have to trust that the multipliers that they're using and how they're allocating those are correct. And again, back to the fishing, the recreating, the cultural identity of your community, there's no line to input the value of that in a purely economic analysis, right? So we need to have a little bit of creativity when we think about modeling and including what is important to us culturally. The benefits, it is super detailed. You can get a lot out of it. It offers you a very connected view to understand those ripple effects and how money moves through your community. And, you know, it frees up time if you were to totally outsource this on your own. But let's think about just doing it ourselves, right? This is the part where we're just beginning a conversation that you can have internally with your colleagues about how do we execute this type of analysis, what are the things that we want to consider when we do this type of analysis. Number one, you want to understand the economic makeup of your community. Pretty straightforward. You could look at tax county receipts. You can typically look at your Chamber of Commerce will carry data on this. If you look at who your 10 biggest employers are, that'll start to give you a sense of how the money is flowing through. But it'll give you a nice aggregate picture of how the money moves through your community. You want to understand the economic productivity of those sectors predicated on which of those depend on water as an input, right? If you live in Piney Woods and you're a highly agricultural area, you might not depend much on water because you get so much of it for free falling from the sky. These are all going to have to be customized based on what's happening in your neck of the woods, and you want to understand how important water is as an input to those activities, right? You want to understand what percentage of the water is provided by groundwater. There may be water rights holders that are extracting from surface waters that are supplementing their groundwater, so you need to know kind of what composite piece of that is in the puzzle. Also, although this is probably not the case, there may be underutilized surface water rights in the area. You could simply supplant the groundwater use with surface water rights, but that would obviously come at a cost. If those replacements aren't available, you have to understand if water supply decreases, what are the implications? If my water-dependent industries take a 20% hit, what does that do to our county receipts, and what does it do to our unemployment numbers? Those are the kinds of questions that you want to be asking. It's very important to remember, though, this isn't all doom and gloom. Luckily, economics is a two-way street, right? There are times when you benefit from this. From a risk mitigation standpoint, what really benefits you is understanding what do I stand to gain versus what am I willing to risk when I lose. So the widget company comes and you say, let's see, we're making $100 a year in geographic district X. If the widget company comes in, we can make 10% more. So you will make $110 instead of $100. So every year you're making $10, right? Out of 10 years, I'm going to say that works 7 of them. You're going to have a drought in the 3 others. Maybe you're going to have dry conditions. Now this is up to you, your assumptions. Look at the frequency curve and say 1 year in 5 is going to be dry. I think that's pretty reasonable. Given the increase in variability and how dry and hot things are getting, I think a more conservative effort would say 3 years in 10 are going to be pretty lean. So I made $10 a year in those 7 good years. It made me $70. I feel pretty good about myself. In the 3 bad years, I take a 30% hit across the board due to water supply issues or if we've got to put some kind of cutbacks in place. So I made 70, and then I took a 30% hit in 3, and that means I lost $33 a year for 3 years. So I just lost $99. So I made $70 to lose $99, right? That's not the kind of analysis we want to be ending up with. That's probably not a strategy for anybody in this room. The idea, though, is through that type of analysis, what am I gaining versus what is the downside in the years where it goes bad? That is how we can begin to evaluate in a dollars and cents way what is acceptable risk in terms of our DFC. Hard to attract a ripple effect. If you do this yourself, you can probably get an eyeball estimate. You might be able to look back historically. Here's what I would probably do. I would go back and look at a time when it was really lean, and then I would compare the receipts on an industry by industry basis from the previous good year. And then you can see what the drawdown was in those related industries. That would give you an idea of how to kind of calculate your own multiplier effect without having to go through the in-plan exercise. But that is time consuming as well. I understand all these things take time. But through doing all these steps and having these conversations, you begin to understand what these DFC choices might do to revenue, which is obviously important. It doesn't, again, back to the socio piece, it doesn't include what it means to your local cultural piece or your ability to recreate and enjoy nature, right? Okay, so we're all subject to the law of unforeseen consequences. This one's really tricky. If we could figure this one out, we would all be on a beach in Bora Bora, right? Okay, non-economic factors may have economic implications. The widget factory comes to town. He begins to extract groundwater. Due to groundwater surface water interaction, we see decreased stream flow. Doesn't feel like that's an economic component. But if I used to go to that stream every year to put a fly on and look for those trout, and those environmental conditions have degraded to a point where I don't want to visit anymore, now all of a sudden your tourism industry is taking a hit. And we're seeing economic implications from decisions that we made that we didn't necessarily think were going to have follow-on implications from an economic standpoint. So we want to be very cautious about thinking through all the ramifications of our decisions in terms of what are those follow-on implications going to be, right? What are those repercussions going to be? Also, if we start to set more aggressive DFCs, we may make some municipalities a little bit jittery in terms of their ability to provide for their ratepayers. It may get to a point where they feel the need to enter into take-or-pay contracts to mitigate their own risk, which is going to be a pass-through, I'm sure, and will increase rates. And it will be a difficult conversation to have, particularly if they trace the increase in risk that they're feeling back to policy decisions that are made. Again, there may be instances where economic growth is positive. We want to look for the Goldilocks zones, right? We want it to be, okay, it made $10 every year in those 7 out of 10, and then in the 3 tough years, we only lost $11 a year, so we're still net positive 40-some bucks, right? You want to find the sweet spot where our rewards are outweighing those risks, and again, given imperfect information, increasing variability, and just people swarming into your areas trying to build houses, it's a moving target and it's very difficult to do. In instances like this, I would only encourage you to be uber conservative in your estimates of how it's going to turn out. So how can we improve our processes? Always looking to improve our processes. Meetings like this. Develop a community of practice. Talk to your neighbors. Figure out what's working. Figure out what isn't working. Go, walk around. Shake people's hands. Also, my guess is most of you have a GCD that is a neighbor, that may have similar economic, even sociocultural economic makeup as your own. Find somebody who is doing it well and call them up and say, what's working, what's not working? Did you try anything that didn't work at all so I can save myself the heartache of trying it? Again, developing this community of practice by sharing knowledge, I think, is very important in all our fields. I think this is a big one too. Don't be afraid to try new things, right? With variability increasing and our only certainty being uncertainty, we are sure to encounter problems and challenges that we've never seen before. If we want to find solutions to problems we've never seen before, we're going to have to be willing to do things we've never done before. So be willing to take some measured intellectual risks, be willing to try new things, and from an adaptive management standpoint, if they don't work, cast them aside and move on to the next thing. And that's how we're going to find solutions to the complex problems that we face across the state. Socioeconomics is dollars and cents. It's often expressed in dollars, but I think what should rule the day is common sense. So that's really all I have for you guys. I hope it was helpful.